Morning, everyone. So a report has just dropped, Boris Johnson's report. Now, I've already seen there's quite a lot of comments about the fact that the committee, because obviously, I mean, there's loads of pages. In fact, there's at least 4 documents that published. There's the big one, 108 pages, and then there's several other ones that they've published as well. One of which is the response from Johnson's lawyer. The other is a response from the committee's lawyer about the Johnson lawyer, and the other one I've forgotten. But the main report, and a lot of people are saying, "Oh my goodness, a 90-day suspension." So that was what they said they would have recommended. They're not now recommending it because Boris Johnson is no longer an MP. But what they have said is they would have recommended a 90-day suspension. Now, I've seen the odd comment from people saying, no wonder Boris Johnson quit. Do bear in mind, if you read none of us got time to read the whole report, but I have read the recommendations and conclusions, every word. And Boris Johnson didn't know he was in line for a 90-day suspension. What the committee seemed to suggest is they had told Boris Johnson that he can expect a suspension that would be of sufficient length to trigger the recall petition. So Boris Johnson didn't actually know he was getting a 90-day suspension until we did just now. He just knew that it would be at least 10 days. So from Boris Johnson's point of view, what he thought was going to happen, because all this outrage from Johnson is totally genuine, by the way. Although he knows he deliberately lied, of course he lied, he basically decided to rest his entire defense on the notion that he couldn't recognize that a party would be strictly necessary for work for basically clerical workers. It was an absolute nonsense. So he knows, although he's deluded, he knows he lied. He knows he lied deliberately. What he's genuinely outraged at is the fact that he's been called out for it. He thinks he's too important. You know, he thinks he's great and he should be he's mad because he's not an exception. He's exceptional. He should be an exception to the rules. That's what he's mad about. But what the committee have found him, let's just be clear about what the committee have found him guilty of. There's 5 main contempts. First of all, deliberately misleading the House. That is ultimately what the inquiry was about. Did you or did you not deliberately mislead the House of Parliament? Yes, he did. Second, deliberately misleading the committee. Now, that should be more serious because he gave his evidence to the committee under oath. Now, bear in mind, there are different burdens of proof. Obviously, in a criminal trial, you cannot be found guilty unless the court believes that you are guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Whereas in a civil court case, and the Privileges Committee is not a court case, but you could imagine it's a similar burden of proof, you probably only have to be more sure that you're guilty than not. In other words, there's over a 50% chance that you are guilty. So it could well be that the committee are saying that he deliberately misled the committee with a burden of proof lower than needed in a perjury trial. But I would still suggest that the Crown Prosecution Service should consider whether the burden of proof is high enough to prosecute, because it is absolutely in the public interest. What is the point in a select committee? Because they hardly ever put witnesses under oath, hardly ever. Occasionally they do it. When they do it, it's because they expect the witness to be evasive. What is the point of putting anyone under oath ever if you do not follow up when you believe they have lied under oath? So I think there should at the very least be the Crown Prosecution Service considering whether the burden of proof is there, because the public interest criterion is absolutely met. Anyway, let's catch up with a few comments. May 22nd, 2020, UK is in lockdown. Invitation has been sent to 200 staff inviting them to a number 10 party. Oh yeah, there'll be loads of individual things in here. The whole thing will be incredibly damning. Obviously, at this point, no one could possibly have read it. It only started to be published just after 9 o'clock. Dave there saying, morning folks, after his resignation tantrum, do we think that Bojo will be hit with a contempt of Parliament? Well, he has been. He has. The committee have found him to be in contempt of Parliament on 5 different types of, like multiple examples of it, but 5 different types, completely different types of contempt. He was only been I mean, how bad is that from Johnson's point of view? He was only investigated for one potential contempt of Parliament. He's come away with a guilty of 5. And also, the inquiry pretty much finished a few weeks ago. They were just sort of finishing off odds and sods. Boris Johnson managed to get himself an extra guilty verdict last week. That is, how do you do that? The trial is over and you still manage to commit an offence which gets you an extra guilty charge. That is some spectacular work, that is. Absolutely spectacular. Harman offered him a way out when she asked him to correct the record. He still hasn't explained why he didn't ask Braverman, his Attorney General, whether the behaviour was within guidance. Yeah, absolutely. He was given, he cannot complain. He is complaining, but he cannot complain. He was given absolutely every chance to correct the record. He was at the very least given the chance to, on reflection, make sure he didn't lie to the committee. He hasn't done that. Does Parliament still have to vote on it? Yes. Now, here's an interesting thing. So, Rishi Sunak wants, there has to be a vote. There must be a vote. Rishi Sunak wants to change how that vote works. Normally, the vote is, do MPs accept the committee's conclusions or not? Okay. Rishi Sunak wants to change it so they vote to just note the report, not to accept or reject it. And the reason for that is because Boris Johnson is about as popular as syphilis within the Parliamentary Party right now. We even had a backbench MP, for no apparent reason, attack Boris Johnson in PMQs yesterday. He was asking a question about supermarkets and yet still tacked on an attack on Boris Johnson to the front of the question that had nothing to do with it. It was really badly engineered. So MPs are sick of him. They're obviously, Nads isn't. I could never be sick with my Boris, but nonetheless, although, do you know what? Right, I'm going off on a tangent, but sorry. So Nadine Dorries now is saying she's not stepping down until Rishi Sunak has handed over to her a load of unredacted messages about her, which she's not going to get. Because if a judge running a public inquiry can't get unredacted messages from the Prime Minister, she's got no chance. But do you know what would be funny? If I were Rishi Sunak, do you know what I would do? I would dig up a load of messages about discussions of Nadine Dorries when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. And I would try and find where Boris Johnson called her a silly slag or something. You know, I would find something where Boris Johnson was really rude about Nadine Dorries, and I would send her that. I'll go, this is what we found with your name on it. Enjoy. But there's bound to be something. But anyway, sorry, I was completely off track. I've forgotten completely what I was talking about. Yes, Rishi Sunak wants to change the vote, but because he may have thought the suspension cannot stand, and they've said we can't now recommend this 90-day suspension. We would have done, can't now, but they have recommended a punishment. That is that he should have his former MP's pass taken away. Now, MPs usually get a pass to the estates of the palaces of Westminster, so they can go into the tea rooms and stuff like that. It's not unprecedented not to grant it. John Bercow, for example, doesn't have one after the bullying case. So they have recommended that this pass not be given to Boris Johnson. So that suggests to me that there will have to be a vote which accepts or rejects it still. So despite Sunak saying he wants MPs just to note it, a punishment has been recommended. So there has to be, surely, I don't obviously know the process, but surely there has to be a vote now. So MPs are going to have to be put in an awkward position. And it is awkward for them. Parliamentary Party are sick of Boris Johnson, right? The public are sick of Boris Johnson, and they're going to be more sick after they read this. Tory party members, different matter. There are obviously a lot of Tory party members that are still, oh, Boris, oh, we forgive you. Yeah, sure. The ones who are still alive, that is. So there's an awkward situation for Tory MPs. Put yourself in their position. So let's say your local party members all love Boris, but your constituents know he's a dickhead and should go away. So how do you vote? If you vote to support the report or to support the punishment even, which is tacitly supporting the report, then the local party members might not be very happy with you and they might deselect you, so you can't be an MP. But let's say you vote against it, you say, no, this isn't appropriate, then your local party members approve of you, but your local voters might not, and they might vote for your rival, and then you're still not an MP. So it's a tricky situation for a lot of Tory MPs. Graham's just saying there, Chris Bryant calling for honours lists being blocked and his pension scrapped. I mean, at the end of the day, that is not going to happen. The committee, MPs are not going to apply an extra punishment onto him. Tory MPs really want this whole thing to just go away. And they're the ones with the majority. So in reality, the committee has recommended a punishment. MPs will sort of probably, I suspect, support it. They're certainly not going to tack an extra one onto it. So that's just Chris Bryant being Chris Bryant, I think. So Maggie May's asking, why would someone want to change the vote? That is the reason. So that because Tory MPs could be in a bind between, if there's a disconnect, and there often is, between local party members and your electorate, putting yourself into a position where you have to pick one is bad, because one group can vote you out at the next election, the other group can stop you even standing if they really don't like you. Like, there's talk at the moment about Bernard Jenkins being deselected because Boris Johnson's after him now. And I want people to bear this in mind. Bernard Jenkins was one of the key figures that actually made Boris Johnson leader in the first place. He was a huge Brexiteer, huge supporter of Boris Johnson, quite an influential backbench MP, although he's never risen to high office, but a very influential. He will have been absolutely instrumental in Boris Johnson being made Prime Minister. And this is Boris Johnson throwing him under the bus. This is not Boris Johnson making moves for a comeback, because if you're a Tory MP, you look at this and you think, hang on a minute, look at the way Boris Johnson is treating one of the people who put him where he was, right? Are you really going to support that person coming back if that's how he treats his closest allies? No, of course not. But anyway. So when an MP leaves the Commons to essentially go lobby for some corporate entity, how is it right they can still have direct access to ministers? Never knew that was a thing. Well, if they're friends with them, they will anyway. They don't need to go into Westminster to do that. They just get them on phone. But yeah, it is potentially valuable to a former MP to still have access. Like journalists, for example, with their press pass can get into the tea rooms and bars to talk to MPs. So a former MP being able to do the same, that is potentially valuable. But in terms of like having access to ministers, you don't need the pass to do that. If you were in their party and you got to know them, you've got them on your phone. So you've got them on WhatsApp. This is why a lot of Tory MPs will be worried about their future employment prospects very soon. Because normally what happens is a former MP does lobby for various companies because they know how the government works and they know government ministers. But when there's a change of government, that all disappears. No one's going to employ no one's going to employ Jonathan Gullis for his contacts when Labour are in power. Anyway, April 2020, Johnson pushed Jenkins as the leader of the liaison committee. That was actually a bit of a shock for it. In fact, we were all shocked, I think, because I remember the first liaison committee with Jenkins as the chair. The liaison committee, for those who don't know, is the select committee who scrutinises the work of the Prime Minister. So, and he was actually asking quite searching questions of Johnson. It was quite clear that he was not going to be a sycophant to Toady. He was going to hold Johnson to account. But he was still a Johnson supporter. He still supported Johnson, and he was a huge Brexiteer. But yeah, Jenkins was absolutely Johnson's pick to run that committee because Jenkins was such an important ally of Boris Johnson. And as I say, this throwing him under the bus out of pure spite. Pure spite. All Tories should be big brother, give them a taste of their own medicine. Well, I was saying, so someone on Twitter was a trade expert was saying, whom I followed for their trade advice, not necessarily their political advice. And they were saying, can the media not try an experiment for the next 3 days? Just don't talk about Boris Johnson. And I actually said, no, this is the good bit now. We have had to endure several years of Boris Johnson's very toxic behaviour. This is the good bit, because this is the bit where those who put him in that place now get a dose of it themselves. Boris Johnson is setting up to destroy the party. He's hitting the self-destruct. If I can't be leader, no one, there's not even going to be a party left, is what he's saying. He wants to cause maximum damage out of pure spite. He is the toddler throwing a tantrum because he's not allowed the chocolate bar. You know, he's in amongst the whole supermarket. I want the chocolate bar. You're not having the chocolate bar. You're going to have your tea later. And he's just sat on the ground, bashing the floor, crying like a baby. And he's going to cause immense damage. And if the Tories lose these two by-elections next month, and I think there's a good chance. Uxbridge and Ruislip, I actually see, it's really weird the way the Tories are going about these by-elections. I think they've got a very good strategy for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. They're pushing an anti-ULEZ agenda, which is actually quite hypocritical, because when on the local elections and Labour were talking about council tax and stuff like that, which ironically has nothing to do with councils really, the government, the Tories were complaining, well, Labour are talking about policies that got nothing to do with the local election. This is unfair. And Labour were basically going, have it. Well, now the Tories are doing the same thing. So they're now making this Uxbridge and South Ruislip by-election about a matter that's got nothing to do with their MP. It's about, they're trying to make it less about Keir Starmer's Labour and more about Sadiq Khan's Labour in London. Good strategy. But that's one where Labour should still win. Labour are polling very well there. Selby and Ainsty is the one where the Conservatives should have the easiest time winning, and yet they've chosen a really bad candidate. They've chosen someone who's vocally in support of fracking. Selby there's multiple licenses for fracking active in Selby, which if the moratorium was ever removed properly, would start again, and it's unpopular there. So they've basically gone for an unpopular local candidate. So in the seat that they've got the best chance of winning, they've gone for a crap candidate. And in the seat where they've got much less chance of winning, I don't know about the candidate, but they have gone for a sensible strategy. But anyway, right, back to the main news of the day. That was just a little side. Bring on a snap election. We can finish this worst era in our modern history. See, the snap election's an interesting one, because we could get it this autumn. Absolutely possible. If I actually going to joke at a video later today. I was having to think about this. Rishi Sunak may well call a snap election, not because he thinks he's got a good chance of winning it, not for any other consideration, just to shut Boris Johnson up. He may just call an election just to shut Boris Johnson up. But there is advantage in waiting another year, because the government are setting us on a course for a recession. We are into interest rate rises that are into recession territory. And the problem will be, if we have a snap election in autumn, Labour come to power, then we have a recession early next year. And it's like, I know people will sort of know that's not Labour, but it will technically be on their watch, which is not, it'd be much better for the recession to hit. If it's going to have to hit, and it looks like the government are going for it, it'd be much better to have the recession hit first and then have Labour come to power, because they won't be able to stop it. Even if they force the Bank of England to change its policies, they won't be able to stop it. Isn't Johnson's statement a breach of privilege, same as contempt of Parliament or court? Shouldn't he be taken to task for allegedly corruption without evidence? Well, he sort of has. But like I say, the committee is not a court of law. It cannot impose an actual punishment on him. All it can do is recommend a punishment that applies to MPs. The only punishment they have, because he's not an MP, the only punishment they have available is taking away his pass, his Westminster pass. Parliament can do nothing else to him. They can potentially, as I say, send a letter to the Crown Prosecution Service that says, should he be, here's the evidence that he may have lied under oath, committed a perjury offence. Just like someone on Boris Johnson's behalf has written to the Met Police with evidence that Bernard Jenkins may have breached coronavirus regulations in 2020. So someone could write to the Crown Prosecution Service and say, should he be investigated for perjury here? Which I hope happens. But there we go. Gary saying, I think it's going to be a 5-year parliament. I think it's still more likely that we have the general election next year, although I think summer I don't think much later than that. But there is a distinct possibility of autumn, because if the Conservatives think they're going to lose it anyway, if they're convinced they're going to lose it, and they know that there's no good news coming in the following year, then better to leave the recession for Labour to deal with. As well as, remember, all this problem with mortgage rates increasing, it's a rolling problem. Every time a new wave of people come to the end of their fixed rate term, and there's another load of them getting unaffordable mortgage repayments. And that's going to keep happening all throughout next year as well. So the advantage for the Conservatives is leave the biggest, if they want to leave Labour the biggest possible mess, they have the general election this autumn. But Tory MPs are basically then sacrificing their seats to do that. So a lot of Tory MPs are not likely to support it, even if it is what's best for the Conservative Party. So, you know, so we will, that's why I think it's still more likely next year than this year. But if Tory MPs were to all act in the interest of their party, they would probably have it this year. Just waiting for Carrie to drop the baby in a distraction today. Oh, no, there's nothing going to distract from this. Carrie could give birth to a 3-headed baby, and this would not be headline news. QA Library quoting there from the report: "We do not consider that a social gathering held purely for the purpose of improving staff morale can be regarded as having been essential for work purposes." Johnson was talking nonsense. Of course he was talking nonsense. And he knew he was talking nonsense. Can't they suspend him from Parliament to prevent him coming back? Well, there was a suggestion that they could have applied the punishment anyway, and so that it automatically applies the second he's an MP again. But they obviously don't think he's going to be an MP, at least not for many years. But that would have been hilarious. It would have been absolutely hilarious, especially now that we know it would have been a 90-day suspension. The 90-day suspension is applied. Obviously, it doesn't take effect because he's not an MP. Then he's allowed to run as the candidate for Henley, which Rishi Sunak, it sounds to me like Rishi Sunak's not going to let him. But he stands as the candidate for Henley, wins in the general election, immediately hit with a 90-day suspension, recall petition, which will succeed. Then he's got to fight a by-election for his own seat again, which he might well win. But it would be a right farce. It would be absolutely hilarious. It'd be worth the public money. Be small change compared to what he's wasted anyway. But they're not going to. I mean, the report says they say that they're not going to recommend that suspension now because they say there's no point. I would argue there is, but they know what they're doing. It says, in view of the fact that Mr. Johnson is no longer a member, we recommend that he should not be granted a former member's pass. As Bojo is unemployed, oh, he's not. He could get a job at Pizza Hut working with Andy. No, he's not unemployed. He is employed on a freelance basis, being paid $1 million a time for giving speeches to drunk American businessmen. Now he has a job. He's also writing his memoirs. Oh, super chat from Jay Dash there. Thank you very much. Will I join Steve Bray and release a charity song once the Tories are voted out? Right. I can't sing. Honestly, like even for drunks, I have a terrible singing voice. When I was went to karaoke when I was much younger, the only way I could actually get on and off stage without having beer thrown at me was by doing. I used to do like Queen's "We Are the Champions" in like a West Country accent. I used to get away with that. That goes down quite well. But in terms of actual singing, no, doesn't. No, it's absolutely dreadful. We'll read the report later today. I would set aside quite a lot of time because it's bigger than you imagine. Because they said, oh, it's like 108 pages. Yeah, and the rest, because there are multiple other documents that go with it as well. Although each of those is individually smaller, but it still adds to it. What would happen if Bozo found his way into the House of Lords? I'll tell you this. Well, he shouldn't do, because first of all, someone would have to nominate him. And I don't think Liz Truss is going to, although it'd be hilarious if she did. That would be hijinks of the highest order if she did, because she hasn't published her honours list yet. So that would be epic trolling if she put him on her. But the other thing is, Labour is supposed to be abolishing it anyway. I know that until it happens, we'll believe it when we see it. Right, Master Templar, thank you very much. £10 super chat. No real message, just appreciate the good job Phil and Graham doing the channel. Thank you very much. And Lawrence Mealy again, $4.99 super chat. Aren't Bojo and the orange different flavors of the same moody biscuit? They are incredibly similar in many ways. I think actually Boris Johnson is less of a dick than the orange one, in all honesty. I think Trump is so far gone. But then maybe that is just being the product of his particular circumstances. In America, Donald Trump, although people keep assuring me that he's losing support, it's quite clear to me he has a massive amount of public support. I'm not suggesting it's a majority public support, but he has a large groundswell of public support. Boris Johnson does not. Boris Johnson has got friends in the media. Boris Johnson is appealing to a narrow section of a very narrow political party. Well, all political parties have a narrow membership. So he appeals to actually a relatively small number of people in the country. But for looking at polling, at least 2/3 of the public want him gone. They want him to just disappear off into the sunset. Whereas Trump is still popular, really. So that, I think, makes Trump more insufferable. His behavior, I think, is worse, but I think it's because it's easier to sustain that behavior with his support base. Johnson doesn't really have one. He has a very noisy support base because he has friends in the media, but it's not. And obviously, Tory party members are disproportionately influential on their party, as you would be. But he doesn't have popular support. And a populist leader without popular support is really just nothing. Is nothing. Is this misconduct in public office? Whether it meets the criminal bar for that, I couldn't possibly know. I'm not a lawyer. Give us a blast of We Are the Champions Somerset style. Well, as we've come to the end, very well. It's not very good, though. It barely reaches the bar for pleasing drunks at a karaoke. So, little blast, little first verse. It goes, I paid my dues time after time. I done my sentence, but committed no crime and bad mistakes. I made a few, but ain't no better. Oh shit, I can't remember the words. You get the idea. I've actually forgotten the words to a Queen song. I must purge myself later. That's disgraceful. I'll have to remember later. You put me on the spot. But anyway, US politics seems to be more tribal than us, so more people support Trump in a religious way. Yes, something's very different there. I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm more curious about American politics rather than interest is the point where I know everything that's going on. But there we go. Right, we'll call it there. Thank you very much for coming on. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all the rest of it. We will, of course, put a link for those who can't easily find it to the report in the description below. Have a good day, everyone. I will be talking about this for the rest of today anyway, in some manner. But have a good day until next time. I will see you later.